Thank you, everyone, for being here today. I'm going to start with a quote from Abraham Lincoln. "I don't like that man. I must get to know him." This quote, attributed to Lincoln, embodies the spirit of braver angels. The challenges that Abraham Lincoln faced and the greatness and humility with which he faced those challenges are more relevant than ever today. At Braver Angels, we're offering ordinary Americans training, a community, and experiences that are helping heal division in this country. And if any of you were here for the SVU presentation, we are so grateful to them for helping us ramp up and talk about their connection with Braver Angels. They have been amazing supporter of this organization. My name's Erika Munson, and I'm a Braver Angels ambassador. I'm here with my colleagues Casey Jorgensen, Lori Cartwright, and Jefferson Shupe to tell you more about this citizens movement that's helping to decrease polarization. So we'll begin today with some thoughts about the personal cost of polarization and the Braver Angels mission. Then Casey and Lori will give you a mini lesson on skills that you can walk away with today that can help you have productive conversations with folks who differ from you politically. And Jefferson will tell you his story about what Braver Angels means to him and how you can get involved. And at the end, we hope to have some time for Q&A. So let's take a closer look at the personal cost of political polarization. First, let's define it. We're actually going to consider a more specific term called affective polarization that relates to our emotions and attitudes, because that's what Braver Angels really tries to get at. Over the last few decades, our affect, our emotions and attitudes towards our own party has stayed relatively similar or even gotten better. This is according to a 2019 annual review of political science. We're not quite as up to date as Mr. Burgee was this morning, who was awesome. But I think you can all sense this. But our views of the other party has gotten worse. And it's not just about the issues, but about how we regard our fellow Americans who differ from us politically. Those people who differ from us, they are other. They are alien to us. They are strangers. They are incomprehensible. They're unlikable and untrustworthy as people, and they're morally compromised. In the book that was referenced in the presentation earlier by Monica Guzman, I never thought of it that way, How to Have Fearlessly Curious Conversations in Dangerously Divided Times. Highly recommend that book. Monica is on the national team. She's a senior fellow for public practice at Braver Angels. She says, if there's one thing that most people on the left and right can agree on, it's that the way we treat and talk to the other side is broken. We can't stomach the ideas across the political divide, let alone the people who hold them. In one 2021 poll, most Americans thought the biggest threat to our country's way of life was other people in America. By June, US voters rated division in the country as the #1 issue facing them personally. Affective polarization is particularly dangerous because, as we have seen, many people will do anything to defeat the other party. We also tend to become unwilling to admit to few, if any, faults on our own side. We see our side as incredibly diverse and the other side as all the same. But the good news is that in studies, they've also shown we have much more in common than we think. And that's where Braver Angels comes in. Braver Angels brings Americans together to bridge the partisan divide and strengthen our democratic republic. We have a pledge that includes the phrase, as individuals, we try to understand the other side's point of view, even if we don't agree with it. The word challenging doesn't begin to describe how hard this is. That has been my experience. This is a really hard thing to do. We recognize at Braver Angels, because of this difficulty, the need to listen to ideas that may seem wrong, may seem even dangerous to us, and then try to understand. Another part of our pledge says, in our communities, we engage with those we disagree with, looking for common ground and ways to work together. This too is admittedly a challenge, but as an organization, we look to have conversations that may lead to common ground. It might not, and we all have to live with that possibility, but having the conversation is super important. Our rule seeks to have red and blue leaders at every level of the organization. We are an example of that here today. I identify as left of center, as does Lori. Casey and Jefferson identify as right of center. And am I phrasing that correctly? Always, words are very important, and I want to describe people as they want to be described. But Braver Angels strives to have that on the national team and among the volunteer leadership in every state. But having said that, we do admit that our organization currently has more, we for shorthand call them blues and reds, has more blues than reds. And we're actively seeking more red participation. And in the Q&A, maybe we can talk about this. We'd love to have your ideas and your questions about that. Braver Angel seeks to reflect America regarding race, ethnicity, and social and economic class. Our constant striving is to be an organization that reflects the country we seek to serve. So how did we begin? This picture is taken at the very first Braver Angels workshop. So on the day after the election of 2016, two friends, David Blankenhorn and David Lapp, one liberal, one conservative, called each other up. David B was in New York City, David L was in rural Ohio. And David B said, New York, the entire island of Manhattan is in mourning. And David Lapp said, I've never seen my neighbors so energized about the outcome of this election. And so they thought together and they said, we've got two Americas here. We've had two Americas for a long time. What can we do about this? So they connected with their friend, Professor Bill Doherty at the University of Minnesota. And he's a distinguished academic in the field of couples therapy. And so based on the concepts taken from marriage counseling, of all places, the organization started up, bringing reds and blues together to help them better understand the other side. Braver Angels was originally founded as Better Angels, based on the line from Lincoln's first inaugural speech, appealing to the better angels of our nature. As our mission and membership has changed and grown, so has our name. We now emphasize the need to be brave and show the courage needed to address our country's divide. This is a timeline of how Braver Angels has grown over the years. So we divide our program offerings into three categories. Grow Bravely, which is training and discussion workshops that build mutual understanding and respect for our communities and differences. And these are conducted online and they're free. They are also conducted in person and organized locally by established volunteers or by curious newcomers who are like, I'd like to have a workshop in my neighborhood or amongst my fellow parents at my school or even in my congregation. We do that for you. There's Pair Up Bravely, which is one-to-one conversations, bringing people across differences. During the pandemic, I paired up with a woman who I got to know in Minnesota, and we would have weekly Zoom or phone calls, and we engaged in the issue of abortion. And she's pro-life and I am pro-choice. It was really meaningful. Neither of us changed our minds, but we could now have someone to put a face on that particular political stance. And then Experience Bravely, a wide variety of experiences that deepen connection and understanding between members. These include debates that you heard about that SVU has. It's not just college campuses. We organize debates all over. Book and movie discussions, and Braver Angels media content. We have a Braver Angels podcast. And Jefferson will tell you about the specific programs we've got going on in Utah in a few minutes. So what are the results? We reduce affective polarization. We're finding that these events help people on both sides of the red-blue divide decrease stereotyped thinking about the other side. They lead to seeing others as individuals, not faceless people who for some reason are standing in the way of getting good things done. In general, and we've been lucky to have academics from BYU who have done the research on the outcomes of our workshops. In general, 70 to 80% of participants in our workshops report better understanding and change in perceptions, which may lead to changes in attitudes and actions. So again, our goal is not to try to make people change their views on the issues. That doesn't always happen. In fact, it's kind of rare, especially if there's not already a relationship of trust between the people talking. Another thing I love about Braver Angels, it's building relationships. You're not shouting out into the void on social media. You're getting to know one-to-one your friends and neighbors, people all over the country. But it can create a relationship of trust. And we believe, in fact, differing views and passionate argument are a vital part of democracy. That's not something we want to get rid of. So here's an example, particularly within my faith community, of how my Braver Angels training helped me. I was at an LDS stake conference, which is a regional meeting for a bunch of different congregations. And my friend, a woman with whom I had served for many years as a ministering sister, was asked to give a talk on how can we protect youth from bad influences at this difficult time in history. And she was particularly concerned about books. I'm a high school librarian, and she was very outspoken about her concern about particular books in schools. And I just kind of went home from church bugged. I don't know if that's ever happened to you guys, but I was like, oh, Connie, did you have to do that? Was that appropriate for church? Why are you bringing this up here? And then I thought, for heaven's sakes, Erika, you're a braver angel, okay? Walk your talk. So I texted Connie and said, could I come over and just learn more about your feelings about this and your experience? She said, sure. So came over, we talked for like an hour and a half, and I was there to listen to her. I wasn't there to share my opinion. If she asked me questions, I was happy to answer, but I was there to hear about her. And I came away feeling so much better. We both love good literature, okay? Our definition of what might be appropriate for a particular age group was not the same. But I felt I was no longer that little feeling of being bugged after church. Whew, totally gone. So, and then this has one more step, which shows how this isn't a simple process and how we have to keep our humility. So Casey and I were being interviewed for a radio program about Braver Angels, a short 5-6 minute interview. And I brought up this example of me talking with my friend Connie. And when it was over, I sent Connie the link to the interview. And I said, do you feel like you were accurately represented by me in this interview? She said, actually not. She said, you called me a book banner. And she said, I believe in free speech. I don't think of myself as a book banner. I believe that school librarians are stewards over an important collection of literature that needs to be appropriate and helpful and nourishing for kids. And so I profusely apologize. I mean, that was absolutely my bad. And what it goes to show is, as I said before, labels and words matter. And using that term book banner, that's a stereotype. That doesn't give us a nuanced look at how this person feels about books in their public school system. So I learned even more from that last step. And we're still friends. I mean, she was so nice about it. I couldn't believe it. So the Braver Angels work may not change your mind or anybody else's mind on an issue, but it does change our views of each other with the goal to reduce affective polarization. And it helps us let go of stereotypes, like the one I used improperly. So seeing each other in more nuanced and less stereotypical ways can motivate us to find more collaborative solutions to our country's problems. Because when we truly begin to turn down the rancor, we can become more willing to take a deeper dive to discover there might be valuable information from a different perspective. Imagine what it would be like if we all approached our country's issues with this approach. And here's a recent development. Braver Angels has started an initiative called Braver Politics, designed to create an environment in which we use grassroots organizers to provide opportunities for officials and their staff at local, state, and federal level to find the skills and make commitments to work together productively across the partisan divide. So here in Utah, in December, just before the legislative session, Utah Braver Angels assembled Republican and Democratic legislators for a Common Ground workshop. Our topic was economic opportunity in higher education, which that was the way some folks were comfortable with framing it. Other folks wanted to frame it as diversity, equity, and inclusion on college campuses. Okay, so even like, what are we going to talk about can be fraught. But we managed to get an equal number of Democrats and Republicans together for this workshop. And it was a private, unpublicized event held in an undisclosed location off Capitol Hill. And some of the participants were concerned about losing credibility with their colleagues and constituents if the meeting was public. So what this series of 2 mornings gave the legislators, it was a chance to get to know one another. And even though they'd served in the legislature for years together, they admitted that they weren't really acquainted with those across the aisle. And they could share personal stories about how they came to hold their beliefs about fairness and opportunity in education. And then together they could identify some basic principles that they might all agree upon. Now, if any of you followed last year's session, you know that the Equal Opportunities Initiative bill that overhauled DEI programs on state college campuses was probably not something the Democrats were thrilled with, okay? But what all the folks who attended our workshop reported at the end of that legislative session was that as a result of the workshop that they attended, they gained the following: a recognition that they have shared life experience and values, and they didn't expect that to be the case. That was surprising. A realization that motives on both sides are quite similar, even if methods to get to the solution differ. And they wanted to come back, a desire to talk more and get to know each other moving ahead. So the same group is poised to continue some work with Braver Angels in the future, and we're really excited about it. Some dismiss our attempts to feel better about and build relationships with those on the other political side as maybe naive. Some may feel that they're compromising their values by even entertaining the thought of engaging across difference. But, as Abraham Lincoln said, I do not like that man. I must get to know him better. Let's take that wisdom to heart. Thank you. Okay, now Casey and Lori, we want you to go home, as I said, with some tools. Casey and Lori are going to present some of those to you right now, and then we'll do some practicing.
As Erika mentioned, we do workshops and debates, and our debates are not the typical kind of debate. They're not about keeping score to see who won. They're more about learning to understand the other, and people are even welcome to acknowledge something that perhaps they don't know, or that they're unsure of, or they are undecided, which you don't typically see in a debate. But our workshops are something that we have 2 different types, one where we teach skills that people can practice in just a hypothetical scenario, or the discussion type workshops where, and they're all interactive, but the discussion type workshops involve people actually practicing those skills using their own political leaning. And so they're able to practice for how they would handle that in a real life scenario. And the skills we teach, we refer to them as the LAP skills. Because of that acronym, and it also being very handy that one of the 3 founders of Braver Angels was David Lapp. That worked out nicely. But these are skills that could be used not only in political conversations, they actually could be used anytime you are in a scenario where you're talking to somebody you disagree with, whether it's religious disagreements in a family. I know we never disagree in families, but if we did hypothetically, you could use them there. I have someone close to me who has 4 siblings, and he's the only one who speaks to all of them because of what went down with the will. And I just think of how valuable these skills are. And as we're teaching them to you today, they might appear simple, and they are, but that does not mean they are easy, especially when emotions are running high and you feel very invested in the topic you're discussing. And so it actually is very beneficial that these are simple enough that you can remember them, but just don't mistake it for easy. And you get to find out a little later just how not easy it is, because we're going to have an opportunity for some volunteers to practice. So I'm going to turn the time over to my friend Lori. Anything you wanted to add on the introduction to the LAP skills?
One thing I wanted to mention was David Bohm was one of the most significant theoretical physicists of the 20th century. He also was very involved in establishing some guidelines around dialogue and the importance of dialogue. In fact, he even differentiated between the terms discussion and dialogue, noting that a discussion is more like a ping-pong match, whereas dialogue is where we open our hearts and our minds to each other. In his work, he warned against the rampant reason and technology happening in society, and advocated for genuine supportive dialogue to bridge and unify conflicting and true and tough division. So that was something that he really worked on with dialogue, is the importance of that and the hard work that involves. He also talked about the consequences of that, of us not being able to have those type of dialogues, as did Monica Guzman in the book that Erika referenced earlier. She talked about one of the highest goals of being able to have dialogue is to reduce violence at the extreme end. But more importantly than that, because if we can do this first, it won't lead to that, is kind of inoculating our minds and our hearts against othering each other. One thing that David Bohm said was communication and dialogue in part is a process, a stream of meandering that flows among, through, and between us that results in some new shared memory that holds society and community together. Sorry, I meant meaning instead of memory. He's really talks a lot about meaning and the importance of meaning and finding meaning from each other in what we do. So those are just some things to lead up to that. The first step in the LAP skills is listening. And if you think about listening as being an explorer, it's active work, you're working hard at it. It isn't passive listening, this is active listening where you're involved and engaged. But if you take the idea of an explorer and you bring in the tools of curiosity, courage, and a desire to connect, then that listening will flow more naturally. So one thing as an explorer, learning to find details about what somebody is saying to you or to truly understand it, the first thing you need to do is to suspend your judgment, your opinion, your thoughts, your impulses. You've got to dial all that down. You want to bring down your emotional brain and raise your rational brain in these kind of discussions. Emotions can really cause us to head in the wrong direction and have dialogue that is not productive or connecting at all. So coming into that with suspending those ideas, it also, as Mom taught, it frees up your mind. When you suspend those judgment, it frees up your mind in a way that you can open new pathways, finding ways of thinking about things. It also helps to release creativity, and that's so important when we're all working together to try and solve problems. So we bring those things in, we bring our courage, we bring our curiosity, we work for connection, and we suspend our judgments. And we keep in mind that no one is beyond understanding. That's an important thing. So the mental and emotional work of listening involves all that. There's also body language that takes place, and I think we all know what it looks like when somebody is not listening to us. They break eye contact, they're distracted by somebody walking by, they pick up their phone, they're looking at their phone, they're always on their phone, on the phone. Instead of eye-to-eye contact, body language becomes part of it as well, and the way you position yourself, the way you're seated. So that's a physical work of it. And as you're exploring and listening, some of the other mental work you need to do is focus on the person's perspective and try and see if you can understand their underlying values and concerns. You're not going about this to reload and come back at them, but to truly understand where they're coming from. And so you want to listen, trying to understand what those concerns and values are. And then anywhere in what they're saying, if you can really focus in on where you have common ground or agreement, that's going to be really important for the next step. And Casey's going to talk about that.
Okay, thank you. So step number 2 in the lab skills is to acknowledge and agree when you can, but only when you can. We are not about manufacturing some sort of common ground that doesn't exist. If it's there, that's wonderful. But you've likely heard the saying, when two people agree, one of them is unnecessary. We need to have differing ideas in our society in order for us to find the best solutions. But if we cannot communicate them to each other, they're not going to do us a lot of good. So you want to, first and foremost, acknowledge what you've heard. This is showing that during the time you were listening, it wasn't an act. You really were paying close attention and doing some deep listening. So now that it's your turn to repeat back to them what you heard, you want to try to restate it even better than they did to represent their perspective. You want to show them that you understood it so clearly that you could be mistaken for having believed it. And don't worry, we have our opportunity to share another perspective coming up. But if we can enter this acknowledgement fully invested, saying, I really sensed you're feeling this, validate that and say, and I heard this, did I understand that right? I think I see this, connect some dots that maybe they hadn't. Just really show you processed what you heard when you're acknowledging. And, there may be 1% that you agree with. And it's very tempting not to give that ground because we can't imply that we agree with any of it because, well, then they just think that we're all on board. We can explain these things intelligently and in ways that we make it clear, say, even though I didn't agree with those things, there was this one part that I really absolutely think you have a great point there. I think, that's where the braver in Braver Angels comes in. We need to have the courage to be able to admit to somebody who disagrees with us and perhaps has a different agenda and who perhaps is pushing it forward and perhaps who we are in fear is going to make changes in our country that will affect us personally, to go ahead and empower. There was part of that you agreed with. That does take courage. As we were preparing, I was looking at these lab skills and noticed several of them tie in really nicely with something that we call the Braver Way. The Braver Way is a list of tenets that we use, and a lot of these lab skills could fall into the categories. I'm just going to mention a few of them now, and I'll get to a few of them later. But one of the Braver Way tenets is that we treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect. So when you are acknowledging and stating back to them, treat them as though you have admiration for them. Because, I hope we do. These are other human beings on this planet that we need to acknowledge and honor the humanity in. Another one of the Braver Way tenets is we welcome opportunities to engage with those whom we disagree. So want to show that. You don't want to shrink away. You want to step up to this and say, I really want to listen to you. You may see things differently, but this conversation, your opinion is important for me to be able to hear. And then one more of the Braver Angels ways I'll share right now is we look for common ground where it exists, and if possible, find ways to work together. Maybe there was that 1% that you agreed on. Ask them, you know what could we do about that 1% thing? Is there something we could do to move that forward? You might find it's a lot more than 1%. I think, and I don't want to demonize the media, because I will say they're just doing what gets clicks. So we are driving that. However, I think some extreme groups are clicking and rewarding some media that is painting a picture that is not entirely accurate. When we talk to the people on the other side of the aisle that are just like you and me, our neighbors, we might be surprised that their perspective is not what we thought it was going to be. You might come away going, whoa, I actually agree with 70% of that. Now, once you know that and you didn't before, what can you do with that? They may be able to work together with you to achieve something that neither of you could have done on your own. So that is the next lap scale. Lori, did you have anything that I missed you want to add?
I found this interesting. Again, something that David Baum said was that in this dialogue, that the sharing of mind is more important than the content of somebody's opinion. That's really hard to keep in mind, but really important is this kind of a dialogue has a different purpose. It's not about winning. It's not about changing somebody's mind. It's not about trying to even necessarily agree, but it's more about understanding why that person thinks the way that they do. And so focusing in on that, on what your end goal is really important in this of it, because it can be hard and it gets heated sometimes, or it can.
When I started doing this, I actually find it can be a relief to say to yourself, I'm just going to listen. I'm not going to have to be working my counterattack while they're talking. It's such a relief. It's just, it can even be, dare I say, joyful in doing it. So I've found that really interesting.
Is it? Okay. Sorry. Do you want me to start all over? Okay, so we've listened, we've acknowledged, and now we're going to pivot. This is a really powerful step and one that I forget and that many people do because they're so ready to jump in and give their own perspective. But this is really important. It's kind of like a pause in the conversation, and you're signaling to the person that you're about to take things in a different direction. So if you think about the analogy of when you're driving in a car and you're getting ready to turn. You turn the turn signal on and then you turn, hopefully. Hopefully that's what you're doing. The signal comes on to let people know behind you what your intention is, and then you make the turn after that. So with pivoting, that's exactly what we're going to do is kind of signal to somebody, I would like to go somewhere else. So you're going to offer your viewpoint. You're going to signal that you're going to offer your viewpoint, but not give it here. So you might use a phrase like, I feel differently about that. Can I tell you why? Or I agree with this part of what you said, and state what it is specifically, but I have a different perspective based on some of my own experiences. Can I share? So you're kind of getting agreement to move ahead. That helps to continue to build trust, which will form a stronger connection. So you pivot, you make that pivot with some kind of a phrase, and then you watch for the signal that it's okay to move ahead. People might acknowledge that verbally. They might acknowledge that with their body language. They might just nod their head. Or you might obviously be told, no, I'm not okay to go ahead. If they go back and restate everything that they've said before, if they start saying it in a different way, if they just say, no, I'm not ready for that, then that's something that needs to be respected. So then you have some options. You can back up. You can go back to acknowledge and have them talk a little bit more about it, and then you clarify things with them. That will help build that trust a little bit. You can plan to meet another time. you can say, you know, I think, how would you feel if we meet and talk about this in a week or in 3 days? Or let's have a phone conversation later tonight when you have more time to think about it. So that's an option as well. But getting that consent to move ahead is really important in maintaining the trust and connection. So once you've pivoted, now it's time to offer your perspective. Now that sounds really exciting, but it's not a time for unleashing. And Casey's going to explain that a little more.
Okay, thank you. And I apologize too if Lori said this, she may very well have. I didn't use my L skill of listening. If when you suggest you want to pivot, they might say no. And then you honor that. And it can feel very unfair because you just invested time in listening to their perspective. Now, as far as they know, you probably agree with them because they sold you on it and you don't even have a chance to explain otherwise. It can be very frustrating. But the thing is, if you plow forward after they've said, no, I'm not prepared to hear that perspective, what is that going to accomplish? I think it's very unlikely they're going to be listening. I think it could potentially damage the relationship. But if they say no and you politely agree, what could that accomplish? So just something to consider. Okay, so with perspective, I'm going to go back to our tenets in the Braver Way. I just love these. And the first one is the one that jumps out to me the most. We state our views freely and fully without fear. The fact that you're here today tells me that you are people who are striving to do the right thing, and that qualifies you to have the right to have this opinion that you are about to share. Do it confidently. Even if you know this is going to lower, you may suspect actually that it's going to lower their opinion of you, or that that's going to damage our friendship or whatever. We share our views freely and fully without fear. We also feel like in Brave Angels, it's very important that we disagree accurately, without stereotypes, without exaggeration. So it's tempting when we're talking to someone who's pulled us this way, if we're right here, to maybe pull a little farther, because we got to meet in the middle, right? Stand where you're at and represent it accurately, because you know something, they may not see the reason over here, and they may not have been willing to come that far. But if you state where you are and say, and this is really, no exaggeration, how I feel, that may sound incredibly reasonable to them. And they might think, wow, actually, I'm prepared to come that far. So when we share our perspective, we do it with that freely and fully and without fear. All right, just a couple other tenets in the Braver Way. One is, I shared this one. We seek to disagree accurately, avoiding exaggerations and stereotypes. I think I'd left off the stereotypes. And we believe that in disagreements, both sides share and learn. So don't not share your perspective. If you think it's welcome, have the courage to do it. It's hard sometimes. You may feel judged. You may feel like you're inadequate to represent the view. Maybe you think, well, someone else could articulate this better than I could. I don't have the statistics right now. But you know, that authenticity of you just speaking from your heart oftentimes will carry a lot more weight than any statistic you could share with them. So the last is, in Braver Angels, neither side is teaching the other or giving feedback on how to think or say things differently. So understand, when you're sharing your perspective, you're not trying to persuade them or teach them. You are just sharing your perspective. So we use the I statements. We say, this is how I see it, and this is my reason why. And so it also can be challenging, but keep in mind, you're modeling for them. And maybe in a future conversation down the road, they'll be able to use some of these skills as well. All right, do you want to add or wrap it up?
Okay, so we have the lab skills: listen, acknowledge, pivot, and perspective. And it can really make a difference in the way a dialogue goes. I'm just going to finish in the words of the famous poet Neil Peart from the rock band Rush. I would like you to just listen. Don't try and go too deep with this, but this is a really simple way of illustrating what happens when we don't engage in productive dialogue. There is unrest in the forest. There is trouble with the trees, for the maples want more sunlight and the oaks ignore their pleas. The trouble's with the maples, and they're quite convinced they're right. They say the oaks are just too lofty, and they grab up all the light. But the oaks can't help their feelings if they like the way they're made, and they wonder why the maples can't be happy in their shade. There is trouble in the forest, and the creatures all have fled, as the maples scream oppression, and the oaks just shake their heads. So the maples formed a union and demanded equal rights. They said the oaks are just too greedy. We will make them give us light. Now there's no more oak oppression, for they passed a noble law, and the trees are all kept equal by hatchet, axe, and saw. Very strong polarization can be destructive to us in so many ways and destructive to our country, but it's especially eroding to our souls and to our souls as a communal group. It's something that causes a lot of damage, as we've seen, and something that we need to strive to do better at. As we've been encouraged by faith leaders, by people here at this conference, it needs to be something that we invest our time and energy in, as we've been doing here.
Okay, so now we're going to practice, and here's my proposal. Does any brave person in the audience who leans right, would you like to respond to a little conversation around policing? I'm going to give a liberal perspective on policing, and then you can try to use the lab skills. And Casey, I'm suggesting you be a coach to this person in real time as it's happening. Okay? So if you're like, what do I do now? Talk to Casey.
We so got this, guys.
So anybody who would like to take that on? Did you just raise your hand? Yeah, come on up. Give this man a round of applause. Okay, why don't you, yeah, come, or why don't you and Casey sit opposite each other? Lori, maybe you move down one? Yes.
He's getting more than he bargained for, isn't he?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hi, Adam.
I'm just warming up for my speaking session.
Okay, fantastic.
Is this on?
Okay, so I'm going to read the read a liberal perspective. So I'm going to stand
You
here
go
and
ahead
say
and read it.
So, conservatives seem to think that throwing more money at the police is going to solve the crime problem.
Can you all hear her?
Can you hear me okay? Crimes come from poverty and discrimination and has to be solved by addressing those problems. Communities of color don't trust the police, and for good reason. Instead of increasing the police budget, I support funding for social workers who can respond to mental health 911 calls rather than armed officers showing up. And we need to support community agencies that can get to the root of causes of crime. And I'm sorry, I'm not looking you in the eye. He's looking me in the eye, though, so that's awesome.
She just coached me to. But I actually find that when I focus on listening with my ears and not using my eyes, I listen better. So that's why.
I do that as well, actually.
So
Law enforcement and take a broader view of public safety. Back to the lab skill.
okay. And you want me to, let's see. Listen, I hope I did that. So,
Except for I interrupted, sorry.
no worries. It is harder to listen to two people at one time, but at the same time, there were certain things that you mentioned there. You mentioned that we shouldn't throw money at it, the problem. You also mentioned that this is a social context, so poor people and people who are in maybe a less represented demographic might have certain trust issues with that. So those are some of the things that I got out of that, and I would go back to acknowledge. So I would agree with many of those things. as a conservative and as a grandson of somebody who was a policeman and who also has an uncle who was a policeman, I also understand some of the things that they go through.
Okay, and so hold on for just a moment.
Okay,
That's perspective.
That's perspective.
So we do
now I
want
need to
it.
pivot.
We do
Okay.
want it.
Okay.
You'd mentioned that there were some things that she had said that you agreed with. Are you
yes.
able to name any of them? And I know we've totally put you on the spot, so it's okay if
Oh.
you can't.
Well, I agree that there are multiple sides of the equation you have to attach. I mean, you have to go against it. Money, I agree, will not solve anything. So, for sure. I also believe that.
Oh, pivot, pivot.
Oh, okay. So pivot. So pivoting. That's right. So I got to get the pivot in there.
Okay.
So there are some other things that I may disagree with you that I would like to, clarify on. Would you be open to hearing those? Okay. So, so the first one is that having some relationships with policemen in my family, I do understand that there are certain points of view that they have and certain things that they need in doing their jobs. And many times those things are restricted. Whether it be from people who are just saying they're not policing correctly, or they are so entrenched in what they're doing that they are always reacting too quickly and causing problems. And I do understand that they're actually engaged all the time with conflict, and it's very hard for them to do that. So they need other types of training as well. Anyway.
That's really interesting. If you're here longer, I'd say, oh, tell me more about those experiences that your family members have. I don't know anything about that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Beautifully done.
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll now hear from Jefferson about Braver Angel, who is our Utah State Co-Coordinator, Red. Lori is our Utah State Co-Coordinator, Blue. And Jefferson is going to tell us more about his experience with the organization.
Awesome. Did a practice. Okay, quick story. Years ago, I was at Disneyland with my family, and we gave our kids a budget and said, go into the Disney store. You each have $15 to buy yourself a souvenir, toy, something. Now, you guys might know $15 doesn't get you very far in the Disney store. And that was part of the plan because one of those kids was just horrible with money, still struggles. And we thought, well, this would be good way to teach him, to bypass some of the things he really wanted and settle for something he could afford. Well, he came to me and said, hey, I found something. It's more than $15. And I said, nope, sorry. We're sticking to this $15. So he went back, kept looking, came back later. And he said, okay, can I borrow from my siblings? I really want this thing for $15. And I thought, wow, what a materialistic kid. He's so selfish. He just wants the best thing he can find, and at any cost. And I said no. And eventually my wife said, you know what? She may have known something I didn't, and said, maybe let him, maybe it's okay. So I said, okay, fine. I guess we'll fight this battle later. So he came back to me and handed me this. So I felt about that tall there. So here's the thing. My son, what really changed? Did he still have to learn things about money? Definitely. Did it change the actual facts on the ground? No. But it changed everything. So I've had experiences like this with family, friends, coworkers, strangers. I've had these constantly. And as far as knowing the intent of the other side, this was my progression. At first, I thought they didn't exist. So politics, for example, I thought, people on the other side, they're brainwashed or crazy or just don't like me or the country or something. I was surprised that I found some. I began to be curious enough to look for them. I began to expect I would find them because it was happening so much when I would actually engage in these lap style skills. And I began to get to where I could engage with people as if I had already found their good intentions. So what has this done for me? When I know where they're actually coming from, it just changes everything. Just like Erika said about her friend at church where she had that bad feeling. Once we can connect, even if we don't still agree, it really changes things. Sometimes we can work together even if we don't compromise any of our values. We can find common ground where we just didn't see it before because we were too distracted by our differences. So I found a way to engage with politics, with people, and keep the relationships. It's awesome. Will this change America? For sure, if we all do this. If not, we can go all the way to the micro. We can be better at persuading others to join us, to change their minds. Even if that doesn't happen, this is still worth it because I have more hope and I have a better view of humanity. So I like to engage with this often. And it's given me a richer life. This has been a passion for mine for about 5 years, even before I knew Braver Angels existed. I wrote a young adult novel to try to teach this to my kids, to give them that experience of how and why to engage in this way. And I can say it's changed my life. So we would invite you to join us. Some things that we do in the Utah chapter of Braver Angels. We have helpful emails, both national and local. We have workshops. We have events going all the time. Sometimes they're Zoom, sometimes they're in person. For instance, this month on Wednesdays, we're getting together at the lunch hour. We have a Zoom call. And so some of us and some of the members in Utah just hop on and we pick a topic, just like the police there, and we discuss it together. It's pretty fun. If you're like me, it's fun. My wife doesn't think it's quite as fun as I do. So we do practice. It's good to be reminded of these things, and to, every now and then, just to bolster us as we go about our conversations with people. We also have a book club, potluck, and we just get together with people, Reds, Blues, and other, and it's great. Trying to advance to the next slide. We actually have a membership meeting this evening, 7 p.m.
7 p.m. You can zoom in.
Yep. You guys need another meeting today, right? 7 o'clock.
And we can give you information about that at the end.
Yeah, I think you guys may have heard about our national convention. It's coming next week. Super stoked about that. Okay, so feel free to get involved. Couple ways you can do that. If you go to braverangels.org, it's got a lot of resources. If you scan the QR code, you can get some take-home tips. I think it does ask for your email, so you're kind of signing up for to be on the email list, if you're okay with that. And texting BA to that number. That is if you want to join Braver Angels. There is a $12 a month.
A year.
Sorry. $12 a year membership fee, and it comes with some great benefits. So, do you have anything else?
I think we have a little bit of time. Are there does anybody have any questions? We maybe should have one question. Yes.
So I was wondering, it seems as though you're really focused on the political aspect, bringing the two quote-unquote parties together. But based on our first general session with Riot, and talked about the similarity that we have within the religious space,
It's fantastic. And there are, I'll just tell you one personal thing and then Laura, you add. So we have programs for religious communities. What I've brought to it is that now when I'm in a church discussion, let's say Sunday school, which is, a meeting, an hour-long meeting with a teacher and folks, and we're going over a particular scripture, um, I now come with my curiosity to that meeting. And in the past, being a liberal in an LDS congregation, I'm in the minority, and so I would often decide I'll give my progressive view, and I'll say one thing in Sunday school, and then I'll shut up because nobody wants to hear me. And instead of that, now I think of a question of curiosity that can maybe broaden the conversation, and not knowing asking it to everybody. We were having a discussion about staying valiant all the way through your life in the church. And so I said, tell me, how are you guys, how do you manage when kids don't want to be in the church anymore? Tell me, does anybody have any experiences about that? And so I wasn't looking for a particular answer, but I was just bringing my curiosity, and we had a really interesting discussion. Lori.
Kind of along those same lines, I am also a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and my kids were all raised in the church, but most of them have left. And that has prompted a lot of discussions between us, but more so with my parents, where I've had to kind of act as a bridge there and try and get them to see and maybe understand a little bit better where my kids are coming from after 6 generations of family members being involved in the church. And when we first started doing this, it was not good. I went in with the idea that I'm going to show them all the things that my kids are struggling with and why they're bad. And that absolutely did not work in any way, shape, or form. Not only are my parents were very involved in the religion, but that was my dad's vocation for his whole career. He worked for the church. So our whole lives kind of revolved around that, and that was really difficult for them. So when I came back to them later in subsequent discussions with the intent to listen and to be curious, it changed the whole tone of everything. And as a result, as other family members are kind of stepping away, they've been able to navigate that a lot easier. My mom always, at least once, every time I see her talks, she'll say something, she'll say, "Oh no, that's not creating a bridge. I am going to work on creating a bridge." So it's made a big difference in everyone's relationship and maintaining the support of the family. So I think these skills work in so many ways. I think they work great in relationships. I wish I had had these skills as a parent. My kids are all adults now, and so I'm using them with them now. But when they were younger, I think we just don't listen to younger kids as well as we should. And I think these are great. It's a great parenting skill as well.
And I'm so glad you asked that, because this is a religious, themed gathering. I just wanted to also add on, Braver Angels is, I think, primarily focusing on the political side of things because that's how it was founded and because that's so much on people's mind this year. But we absolutely are addressing this in other areas. We have something called a workshop called Families and Politics. It's really popular right before Thanksgiving because people are scared to go to dinner with their family. You think I'm kidding? We had a woman for Mother's Day said her Mother's Day gift, she wanted her children to go to that class so they could come have Mother's Day dinner and there not be a fight. We also have something in Braver Angels called a faith-focused initiative, and they've created both faith-sponsored workshops because they have had leaders of congregations come to them and say, I'm at the pulpit saying, love your enemy, and they're shooting daggers out of their eyes across the pews. Right, so we are actually creating those that are faith-specific. We have Catholic, Protestant, Jews. They're working on one for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and that one is going to be a little bit challenging because of some of our policies in the handbook about what we are and aren't able to do in a church building and with leaders. But there's there's absolutely ways to still do this. You could teach the lap skills and never mention politics once. You could put it in the context of anything that you disagree with.
And your local Braver Angels Alliance can help you put on a workshop for your congregation, whatever. Okay, Jefferson.
One thing, Lori reminded me of something that she said. If you have, schools like high school students or college, if you're interested in teaching some of this to them, we have ways to do that. Sometimes it's different, at their level. So if you inoculate them early against polarization like this, it can be a really good thing.
Okay, I think we have to call it quits. Thank you so much for being here. And please come up to us during lunch, during the rest of the conference, if you have more questions or things we can help with. Thank you so much.